Beloved community. So first, a little bit of personal stuff. 2 weeks ago, I actually traveled down to LA, NorCal to Southern Cal. Whole different world, right? But I got to celebrate my daughter graduating from UCLA. Yeah. And for those of you that have been around our community together, how many of you remember that little girl in golden locks? Yeah, maybe about 1/3 of the room. I'm a pretty proud mama. We moved her to UC San Diego, where she's starting a 1-year pre-med program where they only selected 30 people to go through this program. Yes, so it just gives me goosebumps, and I know those of you who have children know exactly what I'm talking about. So just wonderful and delightful to watch her bloom. And I just feel like, by the grace of God, thank you. And then last week, I came home for a few days, and then last week I actually led what was called a CSU Summer Institute for a week. We had approximately 300 people on day 1 and 150 people day 2 through 5. And essentially most of those people were faculty. And we teach faculty, we bring together faculty from the 23 CSU campuses scattered throughout the state. Doesn't happen very often. And they come together to learn how to change the way they teach. In other words, less lecture. And they learn more about how to engage the 21st century learner. For those of us that did go to college, think about the college student today who is in rich media all the time, interacting and engaging. There's lots of tools and lots of new pedagogies and lots of new things about the learning science that faculty may not normally have time to learn, to know, to share with one another. And so it was a very special event. I like to share this comic. So imagine two kids and a dog. And one kid says, "Hey, I taught my dog to whistle." And the other kid leans in, listening. "I don't hear him listening." And the other kid replies, "I said I taught him. I didn't say he learned it." And so it is with teaching, meaning faculty can have the best teaching day of their life, and it doesn't necessarily mean that the students have learned anything. So it's a very special experience, and you might ask, well, what does this have to do with anything here? Well, those of you know that we're based on a philosophy called science of mind. The science of mind, if I say it in a 30-second elevator speech, is that Dr. Ernest Holmes felt that both religion and science would start to come together. And so it is in both education and in this spirituality that we are inspiring people to change their mind, because then that changes their life, and then it changes the world. Now, of course, good, impactful teachers are a powerful way to change the world, yes? Do you remember any impactful teachers in your life? And what was it about them? What was the magic touch of those particular teachers who inspired you? Their passion. They cared. You felt that. Their creativity. Engaged with that creativity, which is one of our natural, thanks to John's meditation this morning, about our ability to co-create. Sometimes we forget that. So at the end of the Summer Institute, after a week long together, I said to the faculty, you may have learned lots of new tricks, but really, at the end of the day or at the end of the semester, it might not even be your new ways of teaching or using technology that makes a difference. A faculty member had told me a story where a student came to his office after all finals were over, and the student came in and said, "Thank you for saving my life." And the teacher said, "Yeah, well, it was great to sit down with you and spend a little more time talking about what you're passionate about and helping you find your way." And he goes, No, you don't get it. You saved my life." The student had planned to end his life, but explained to the faculty member that because he saw him, took the time, heard him, and I mean saw him as in the divine spirit in me sees the divine spirit in you, that he changed that student's life forever. Now, of course, teachers get exposed to classes in this way, but so it is with each one of us, the people that we meet. Some people just need to be seen and to be heard, and that in itself can be healing. And that means being able to be present, really present with people. And how easy is that in our highly distracted society? Moving from one thing to the next. How do we teach faculty, students, and ourselves to be that presence? Now, my partner, Sue, always have to count. We've been together over 30 years. She teaches at Chico Junior High, and she'd be very embarrassed if she knew I was talking about her today. She teaches 7th and 8th graders, and she actually took an online course called Mindful Education. And essentially, it's curriculum about how to teach kids how to be present. And I asked Reverend Lisa Carson, who leads our youth and family, as well as Johnny Samples, to please take that curriculum and to bring it back to us, and I'll talk about that in a second. But my partner, at the end of the year, she asked students in groups to create presentations. And can you imagine what kind of presentations these 7th and 8th graders create? Tell me what you think they do. Their smartphone. They create videos that, you know, think about when you and I were kids. Create videos? Yes. Instagram, Facebook, you know, you name it. They put pieces together, they create stuff, and then they take videos of it, and then they put the video together, and it's just amazing. But what's more amazing is what they say about having been taught mindfulness. And I wished I could just have a long list of testimonies, but of course she didn't ask for releases. But things like, I use mindfulness when my brother starts a fight with me. When I start to get annoyed, I become mindful. And they actually talked about how one student was actually teaching his older sister how to use mindfulness. Wow. What if we had more of that to spread about in the world? And so, I know Johnny Samples isn't here today, but for those of you that know her, when you get a chance to see her, I want you to thank her because this past week she brought 6 preschool kids here and led a summer camp where she used some of the mindful education and some other curriculum also. And this was our opportunity to sort of try this out, pilot, experiment with it. How did it go? You know, what was the feedback? And I got to talk to Johnny a little bit yesterday, but we're going to spend more time next week debriefing. But I really look forward to this community doing more of this and to bring a vision about bringing more families here at the center to teach mindfulness. Because in my opinion, my belief is that we have the potential to change the lives of the student and to change the lives of the world by bringing that here. And I'm hoping that you'll support us in this endeavor as we move forward to create that vision and to then bring that vision to reality. I also wanted to mention this book called Mindset. I think I talked about it once before. It's by a researcher whose name is Carol Dweck. Mindset, the new psychology of success, how we can learn to fulfill our potential. And the book has become very popular in education, and it talks about a fixed mindset. I'm not a math person. And a growth mindset. I can learn how to do math. Now, really, this is generic science of mind, because what is it talking about? Changing somebody's mind to think that their intelligence is fixed. Your IQ, you know, I sort of laugh when I'm on the internet and, oh, see this president's IQ. And it's like, you know, IQ changes. It does. IQ can change if the person is open to growing it. Do we need kids to know this? Yes. So another aspect, and you know, it's not bad for us either. Matter of fact, it's true that you can learn until the day you die. You have the opportunity to learn until the day you die. Matter of fact, brain science is learning that the more you expose yourself to new things, the more neuronal pathways, and hence the better for the longevity of life, to keep your brain healthy. Hopefully that's why you're all here, right? I also wanted to let the community know, I'm going to reiterate a little bit of what Ann said. There's a lot going on in the background here. You may not see it on Sundays, but there's a lot going on. And our new website is being developed, Center for Spiritual Living Chico, rather than Chico New Thought Center for Spiritual Living. And that's going to be ready about the middle of July. And I speak next on July 16th, so I hope to be able to preview it with you all. And that really becomes a very good foundation for us as far as the wheels are on the bus. Now we're ready to market, to aim, and to know how we would like to grow together. And so you can expect more of that happening. And we can celebrate that, which brings me to today's lesson. Celebrating freedom of choice. So what is 4th of July? What does it represent? Independence Day. It commemorates the adoption of the Declaration of Independence. How many years ago? Speaking of that math, 241 years ago. That's something to celebrate, is it not? Now, granted, I know I have descendants from Europe. I realize we're babies. But I also know that regardless of the current political scenes, people are proud to be Americans. What does that represent? You know, I was going to read the Declaration of Independence because I thought, how often do we go back to that? I mean, yes, we may have read it in high school and or college, but how often do we go back to our roots and remind ourselves where we were and why the Declaration of Independence was created? It is a good reminder. And of course, many generations, when I was a kid, if somebody would have said, well, you read the Declaration of Independence, I either would have had to go to my set of encyclopedias or go to the library. But what do you all get to do? I love it. Google it. That's right. And I want to encourage you sometime today to read that Declaration of Independence. I think it's really important, most especially in these times today. Now, I decided I'm not reading the whole thing because it's long and it's dry. But I'm going to read a portion of it that I know you've heard a million times, but I want you to take it in. It's the second paragraph. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men and women are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Liberty, the state of being free within society from oppressive restrictions imposed by authority on one's way of life, behavior, or political views. We instituted a brand new government. Tell me, how was it new? No king. What does that mean? It's a democracy. In other words, it's not the king telling the rest how it should all go. Now, when you read the Declaration of Independence as a formal document, it spends a lot of time talking about separation. Separating the 13 states from the government of Britain, Great Britain. The Declaration of Independence justifies that separation. And you know what I got out of it reading it in the space and time that I am today was saying, we tried this. We tried to negotiate. We tried to speak up. We tried to share, but we have decided to separate. Now, that's one side of the same coin. Remember the lesson where I held up a coin and I asked this side of the room to explain to that side of the room what they were seeing? Do they see the same thing? No. Is it one coin? Yes. So the other side of the coin is you can look at this document as something that formally unifies the states as the United States of America. From this very document, our forefathers began the process of many deep discussions. I'm going to come back to the word discussions for setting up a new government which represented a new freedom, a new set of choices of how the United States government would function in order to represent their people. I posted this on Facebook because I just felt it was very profound. Discussion is always better than arguments, because an argument is to find out who's right, and a discussion is to find out what is right. But that means we need to be able to respect our diverse views. And many of you remember approximately a year ago when I have the Pink Floyd picture of white light coming through a prism and coming out multiple colors. It's intentional for us to be diverse. It's what makes life so rich. So today, there were a lot of choices about how it's 4th of July. There are so many things I could talk about. Oh yeah, let's just be grateful and celebrate the freedom of choice. The freedom of choice. Celebrating the fact that we have the freedom to choose so many things. If we go back in time to 1776, tell me what new freedoms were we afforded after establishing the new government?
We can choose our own taxes.
Choose our own tax. Okay, instead of the Boston Tea Party. I get it. Okay? Freedom of speech, representatives. Freedom of religion. And freedom of religion, not just practicing in your own, but freedom to, it's not congregate, to assemble. Thank you. Yes. In other words, you could go through the long list of Bill of Rights, but just the first one is the freedom of religion, speech, and the press, and the rights of assembly and petition. And that's just the First Amendment. So, do we celebrate these freedoms? Or do we just sort of take them for granted? Today's the opportunity to be in gratitude, to celebrate the so many choices that we have today. The pursuit of happiness, the pursuit of liberty. Is there many ways to have that demonstrated? You bet. And I wonder what our forefathers would think now when there are so many choices. For those of you that have been in Europe in the last 10 or 20 years, if you go into a European grocery store, how does that compare to our grocery store? Not as many choices. We'll talk about that. Yes, we have choices galore. Matter of fact, over 1,100 toilet bowl brushes. I love this article that says, you know, Amazon sells 1,161 kinds of toilet brushes. I know this because I recently spent an evening trying to choose one of them for the bathroom in my new apartment. Nearly an hour later, after having read countless contradictory reviews and pondering far too many choices, I felt grumpy and tired and simply gave up. The next day, I happily bought the only toilet brush in the local dollar store. Now, My daughter majored in psychobiology, learning science, neurology, and I just love the conversations we have. And she was saying for her generation that sometimes she thinks they're not as satisfied because there are so many choices that then when they choose something, it's like, oh, but I could have had a V8. Now, she must have been reading the research because I read this research. It's called the JAM study. A grocery store conducted 2 tasting sessions. In one session, shoppers were allowed to sample 24 flavors of jams. And in the other session, they were allowed to sample 6. The results? When they had 24 choices of jams, they attracted 60% of the shoppers to sample some of the flavors. Shoppers sampled on average 2 flavors. 3% of the shoppers bought the jam. However, when they offered 6 choices of jam, yes, they only attracted 40% of the shoppers instead of 60. And those 40% still sampled only on average 2 samples. But instead of 3% of the shoppers buying jam, 30% of the shoppers bought the jam. Isn't that fascinating? More options means more possibilities to be perfectly content, right? Decision fatigue is sapping us of happiness and making us regret the choices we make. Wow. Wow. Too many choices can exhaust us and make us unhappy and lead us to sometimes abscond from making a decision altogether. You don't have this in your life, right? Nah. So many choices about where and how to spend and save and invest your money. So many choices about what you want to do when you feel stuck in this relationship. So many choices when it comes to your job. Do I stay? Do I go? What do I do? Many choices. And we know that sometimes we have analysis paralysis with so much information. Now, I believe based on the soul, you won't make a wrong decision. There is no wrong decision. And when we make a decision that we then look back on and reflect on, do we get to learn? It's not about getting it right all the time. Matter of fact, for some who've been to psychologists, it's always, do you want to be right or do you want to be loved? Research shows that the excess of choices often leads us to be less, not more satisfied. There's often that nagging feeling we could have done better. The level of certainty people have about their choices decreases, and the anticipation that they will regret the choice that they actually did choose. Wow. Now, who controls our thoughts? Who's the we? Do you? Do you? It's sort of a trick question. Because many times we have our eyes open during all day long, and who's really driving our decisions? Subconscious, that's true. But I'm basically saying as we continue to be inundated by what we see and not what we see. And of course, we always have the freedom to choose, right? But most of the time, we're creatures of habit. Most of the time, we're creatures of habit, which means there is purpose in becoming mindful. And that takes practice, which of course takes awareness to make the choice to practice that, right? It's all tied together. So, all right, there's so many choices out there, and we want to celebrate those choices. Indeed, we want to be grateful and appreciate that there are so many choices. And in some sense, maybe not take ourselves quite so seriously. Fortunately, most of our decisions are less weighty, and one way to tackle the choice of a problem is to become more comfortable with the idea of it's good enough. That's sort of an interesting option. But continuing to look, understanding how and why we make decisions can perhaps help us to make better choices. So I found this article that I just thought was outstanding. So how do you help with all of these wonderful choices? And even though there are wonderful choices, would you choose the same thing as you? Why not? That's right. And you know what? Different values. In other words, as you're making a decision, what you value and what you value may be very different. But again, that comes back to knowing what you value. Value-based decisions significantly help us make better ethical choices, faith-related choices, relational choices, etc. Value-based decisions can also help speed up our ability to make choices by way of helping us recognize the values, the preferences that we would choose. Now, so you could take away the lesson. All right, I know my values. Do you? This particular research found that individuals only made choices consistent with their values if those values were cognitively activated. What does that mean? Well, one of the suggestions was print out, write up and print out your own personal core values and make them available. To reiterate, it's almost like having your purpose. There is power in purpose, and if you know your values and you are reminded consistently of your values, then your life, your choices, what you choose to do even in the next minute will be driven by who you uniquely you, truly are. The research reveals that when we make value-based decisions, we tend to feel more positive about them, and they can actually lend themselves to our ongoing motivation. So to know your core values means becoming conscious and aware, getting to know thyself. Know thyself can be taken so lightly. Oh, I know what my favorite dress is, my favorite color, my favorite... No, I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about know thyself. The time that you spend in relationship with yourself. You want to own your own mind? You have to spend time with yourself and centering yourself. Going back to what I said in the beginning about mindfulness. So yes, there is a lot to celebrate in the freedom of many choices. We have the opportunity to be grateful for those choices and exercise those choices. I won't remind you that most of the things we do every day is by habit. Which means sometimes we even feel stuck. Stuck financially, stuck in relationships, stuck in a job. And we think we don't have choice. But we do have choice. And to execute that choice again means, at least for me, through my faith in knowing and connecting with myself, that more choices will become available. I will become more aware of what the right choice is, not for you and you, but for me. Sometimes life forces us to get uncomfortable. And sometimes when we're uncomfortable, we're not so grateful. Sometimes it means looking in the rearview mirror and going, all right, I see why I was, quote unquote, sort of forced out of my comfort zone. And according to the brain science, you want to be out of your comfort zone, because if you're not growing your brain. So I haven't put this in published form yet, but I'm going to be leading a labyrinth walk at the end of July. And the focus is going to, this is at the Children's Park downtown. It's back by the creek off Esplanade. And so I'll announce the time and all of that. And I'm going to focus on finding your values. And of course, your values may change over time, meaning 10 years ago they might have been one thing. Today they might be another. But purpose is powerful. And so this will be a spiritual practice to allow you to discover, appreciate, and find your values so that you can exercise your freedom of choice, which is really what the 4th of July is for celebrating. Namaste.